tell me, but otherwise I'm going to keep going. So at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center, we are grateful to live, work, and play on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular, the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam First Nations, whose territory we are located on in Burnaby, BC. The Nikkei National Museum is dedicated to honor, preserve, and share Japanese-Canadian history and Japanese culture in Canada. And I do hope my slides are moving forward. Again, Jorge, unmute and tell me if they're not. In all the work that we do, we remember the mass dispersal, incarceration, internment, and dispossession of more than 22,000 Japanese Canadians forcibly removed from coastal British Columbia in the 1940s. We work in Asian heritage and anti-racism all year round, but the importance of our efforts is amplified during anniversary years of historical trauma. This year marks the 80th anniversary, as Jorge mentioned, of Japanese-Canadian internment. We share this complex history of this commemoration with all people of Japanese ancestry in Canada through curatorial projects, exhibits, cultural events, and programs. Many of our stories are told by those with lived experience, held in memory or reclaimed by their descendants, and our history continues today. My background prior to becoming director curator at the Nikkei National Museum, as Jorge kindly mentioned, is mainly in contemporary art. So I curate for the Nikkei National Museum in ways that might be considered non-traditional in the heritage sector. But today we meet three of the artists I've had the honor of working with. Kellen Hatanaka, whose exhibit is currently on at the Nikkei National Museum, Brent Hirose, who I've worked with twice on internment era-related projects, and Jon Sasaki, who I was fortunate to work with on my very first exhibit I curated for a Japanese-Canadian internment anniversary at the Nikkei National Museum. In 2012, on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of internment, I was hired by as a guest curator by Beth Carter, who is my predecessor at the Nikkei National Museum. And together we developed yoing, which means reverberations in Japanese. I was curious to investigate the effects, the ripple of Japanese-Canadian internment on creativity through generations of artists. And this image is of the Evite from that exhibit. And here's a snapshot of Jon's work. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think he'll enlighten us in his part. But this is a fantastic video piece that was included in the mix. For the 75th anniversary of internment, I was 2 years into my role as museum director curator, and I didn't want to duplicate my work from the previous anniversary. I had been in discussion with the Universal Limited Theatre Group, who was developing the play Japanese Problem that explored the 1942 Japanese-Canadian incarceration experience at Hastings Park. Hastings Park, by the way, is the livestock building, which still exists at the PNE today. And it was there where women and children were detained until they were sent off to internment camps or sugar beet fields during the Second World War. Brent was part of the cast, and he has a unique ancestral connection to this history, which he might talk about later, or you can ask him in the Q&A. The exhibit we created was called Hastings Park, 1942. With the play central to the installation. The play was performed in situ at the PNE as a theatrical production and performed a few times inside my gallery, but it was unrealistic to expect Brent and the rest of the cast to perform 5 days a week for 4 months, which was the run of the exhibit. So we filmed and projected a video of the performance on a set inside the museum, which became the sculptural centerpiece to the exhibit. We pulled Brent back in to help us with a virtual exhibit that just went live last year called Righting Wrongs. This draws on more than 300 letters written by Japanese Canadians in protest of the forced sale of their belongings in the 1940s, featuring videos, narration, by descendants of letter writers and a fully digitized searchable library of the letters, Righting Wrongs is available for the next decade in both English and French on the Digital Museums Canada platform. Our current exhibit features Kellen, Safe Home, and it's in its last week. Through the lens of the historic Vancouver Asahi baseball team, contemporary Canadian artist Kellen Hatanaka explores issues of race, xenophobia, representation, and implicit bias that are relevant in both sport and society today. When you enter the exhibit in the Karasawa Gallery at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center, you are met with larger-than-life composites inspired by historic Asahi baseball players, colorful paintings, sculpture, and suspensions, all in variations of paper. This is contrasted with a heritage display from our archives of objects to the left of your screen that once belonged to original Asahi players. Last month on International Women's Day, thanks to funding from Library and Archives Canada and our friends at the JCCC in Toronto, we went live with the Women of Change online exhibit. This exhibit, which is available through Google Arts and Culture, highlights the incredible stories of 6 Japanese Canadian women who upheld the community for over a century. Notably, Tomiko Nishimura, Miyoshi Miki Tanaka, Michiko Midge Ayukawa, Kinori Oka, Sono Nakazawa, and Justice Marika Omatsu. Now, inside the museum, we are currently refreshing a permanent exhibit that is displayed on our second floor walls called Taiken, which means from personal stories. And Jorge mentioned briefly in Brent's bio about working with Carolyn Nakagawa. She is our education program developer, and she is primarily the project lead on this exhibit. It's a linear narrative of Canadians of Japanese ancestry from early arrival to today. And this image shows the wall that will speak to the internment era. It's hard to read on your screen, but I hope you will visit us in person and see the entire display that will open later this year. Official programming around Taiken will take place in the fall, probably close to the anniversary of Japanese Canadian redress, when the federal government officially acknowledged their mistreatment of Japanese Canadians during the Second World War. Our exhibit following Safe Home that runs May-June of this year is not directly related to Japanese Canadian internment, but our mission also includes culture. This traveling exhibit from the Japan Foundation showcases 100 designs, many designed after the Tohoku earthquake tsunami of 2011. It offers a look into everyday life in Japan, as well as designs that have influenced trends around the globe. Japanese Design Today 100 opens next Saturday on May 7th, not this coming, but the following. And if you are in Metro Vancouver, please come to our reception from 2 p.m. that day. And I hope this works to show you. Oops, sorry. Let's see if we can get to the next screen. There we go. We cap off our internment anniversary year with a contemporary art exhibit inspired by Japanese handmade paper washi that links 2 Canadian female artists from different generations, but whose trajectories include being of Japanese ancestry, working alongside the Inuit community in the North, and exploring the merging of cross-cultural techniques of Western and Eastern influences in their art making. So this features Naoko Matsubara and Alexa Hatanaka, who is, by the way, Kellen's sister. This exhibit is evolving quickly, so you can expect a title change and more details in a couple of months. So that is it. I will stop screen sharing, and I'm going to invite our guest artists one at a time to come tell us more. And we're going to start with Jon Sasaki. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Sherri, and thank you, Jorge. I'm honored to be part of this panel. It's great to have a chance to talk about a very important topic that admittedly, I didn't give much thought to until quite recently. And by quite recently, I mean in the last 8 or 10 years. But Sherri was there at the beginning of this journey. And I just want to say, as an aside, I'm really grateful for her patience and her guidance over the last 10 years. So just going to share my screen here. And is that working?
Yes, that's working.
Okay, great. Sorry, lost my little preview, but yeah, so 10 years ago, I received a really nice invitation to exhibit a video piece at the Nikkei National Museum for an exhibition called Yoen, which Sherri, you mentioned. This is actually just a film still from a 2-minute loop where I'm playing a sort of a character inspired by like silent movie everyman characters. And he's trying to reach the top of this wall, but he doesn't have a tall enough ladder. So he's kind of trying to make do with what's available, which are these sort of very short ladders that he then stacks one on top of another, just using whatever was at his disposal, even if it means dangerously climbing a bunch of stacked ladders. And so I got this very kind invitation to show this work at a prestigious museum. And I just wanted to include this excerpt from my response. This is my reply to Beth Carter's invitation. It was kind of curt. And I said, my Japanese Canadian heritage isn't really a factor I consider in the studio. And I read this now and I'm just like, what a jerk. You know, my email continued on, and I was sort of trying to discourage Beth from including the piece because I couldn't really see how it fit in to to a show about Japanese Canadian identity. And I'm really embarrassed by this 10 years later. But I now realize that my denial or sort of obliviousness to this Japanese Canadian identity didn't come out of nowhere. There was sort of powerful historic forces that shaped this position. And there are deeply ingrained reasons why some Japanese Canadians don't identify as Japanese Canadians. And that in itself is an important part of the story. And so, of course, Beth and Sherri were well aware of this, and thankfully they included the video piece, despite my humming and hawing. And because I wasn't seeing something that was actually there. I wasn't recognizing that indirectly the piece is very much related to Japanese Canadian identity insofar as the fact that I was trying to make it not about Japanese Canadian identity. So nothing much changed in my thinking around sort of my art practice and my identity until a couple of years later, actually 1 year later. I received an invitation to do a month of art making, sort of a mobile residency in various cities and towns in Japan. And, I was finally given this opportunity to visit the country that my dad's family had left a century earlier. And, this was a country I didn't grow up hearing much about. So I thought this would be great. It would be a great jumping off point to try to understand what it means to be Japanese Canadian. I don't think it was like fully formed in my mind, but, I thought maybe it would be good to sort of gain some sort of baseline so I can think about the ways that Japanese culture was modified by geography and history when it was transposed to Canada. And it was one of these life-changing opportunities, and I see it as like a real fork in the road moment. So this is the two curators who invited me to go, Daisuke Takeya and Sherri Kajiwara. And this is a shot taken in a sort of a restaurant in Osaka that became this sort of de facto home base for this group of wonderful artists from Canada and Japan. And this shot was taken at the beginning of the trip. And I was sort of trying to get my bearings at this point. At first, I found it very disorienting. I was walking around the city trying to, make sense of things, photographing stuff, photographing all the things that tourists typically photograph, like the amazing 7-Elevens and the computerized toilets. And what is this? This is a vending machine in my hotel hallway that was dispensing curry that heated itself somehow through a chemical reaction. But the thing that really struck me early on was I noticed this bike, and it was one of many unlocked bicycles, unlocked and unstolen. And I was genuinely confused by this. And I thought, like, wow, I'm not in Toronto anymore. And I wanted to poke at it a little bit. And my way of trying to unpack things that confuse me is often to sort of figure out an art project around it. So that's what happened. I decided to do like an ad hoc intervention in the neighborhood where I was staying, putting signs in public space, asking people to please not take this 1,000 yen. It's not a lot of money, but it was a real bill worth about $10. And these were placed in various locations. This is one near the pachinko parlors. There's another one on this sort of community announcement board. And this one actually disappeared 3 hours later. All the other ones stayed up for the, I don't know, until like nighttime. It was amazing. But this one disappeared 3 hours later. Not because of this kid. But I thought, yeah, that's great. That's 3 hours longer than in Toronto. And I figured, that experiment was over until I got back that evening to the restaurant that we were sort of using as our meeting place. And the first thing I saw when I entered the door, through the door, was my sign with the bill attached to it. And apparently a neighbor was very concerned at seeing this sort of bill and the sign, that they did some asking around to try to figure out who the money might belong to. And someone else told them that some visitors had been spotted at a restaurant a few blocks over, and they delivered the sign into the care of the restaurant, and the money, of course, and even the push pins. They included the push pins. So it was like this really unexpected result from my social experiment. And this was sort of an early moment of art making as a way to try to grasp these cultural differences. And I was fortunate enough, not long after, in 2015, to be invited back for another sort of residency and exhibition. This time it was paired up with a Tokyo-based artist named Hiroaki Morita. And we were tasked to make new work around the idea of bridging cultures. The gallery was close to this particular bridge, and we decided that we would actually kind of delve into what actually was being bridged, both figuratively and literally. And that involved getting this underwater submersible drone that we spent some hours like scanning the riverbed looking for. We didn't exactly know what we were looking for, but like the video footage was actually quite beautiful. And then when we did find things that had been, I guess, turfed off the edge of the bridge over the years, like this bicycle, for example, we had a diver go and retrieve these things, these really kind of crusty, seaweedy objects. And they were put on display, this really stinky display in the gallery space, along with the documentation of the process itself for retrieving these objects. So in creating this task, Hiroaki and I kind of created the need for a lot of negotiation and decision making, which effectively became the sort of the bridging that we wanted to explore. Fast forward to 2018. This was my third residency in Japan, and I think I was very accepting at this point that I would forever be a fish out of water in Japan. Especially here, I was being hosted at the Koseiji Buddhist Temple in Kyoto. It's this incredible building, and an active place of worship. And they kindly put me and 4 other artists up for about a week. We were invited to make and show new work there. But again, like very much out of my element. I spent that week sort of trying to adapt to the ways of life in the temple and sort of further afield. And it kind of culminated in a series of improvised travel adapters. This was also very early on. I realized that I didn't have sort of a portable travel adapter for my 3-prong North American plug. Would not fit into the 2-prong outlets in Japan. So I had to improvise this a spoon and a safety pin to sort of bridge these two culturally specific standards, like the North American plug and the Japanese outlet. They didn't interface without an adapter, so I was interested in finding ways to make them compatible. And the subtext, of course, is how we can adapt when we're away from home, and how we can find ways of connecting and overcome these hurdles until things kind of connect and click. And it's been an ongoing series. This was on the same trip in a hotel room, using things that were just kind of in my travel bag or in my partner's bag, things that a traveler would ordinarily sort of travel with. And then it sort of branched out. This was in Ravenna, Italy, a little while after that. So it's about sort of figuring out how to overcome challenges. Around the same time I was doing this body of work, I was doing a deep dive into a family history, my family history, and through the wonderful online archives of the Nikkei National Museum, I found this record of a forced sale of my grandfather Senji Sasaki's fishing boat called the Ark, the SS Ark, which was appraised at $1,600 and sold off at $1,000 because in 1942 he was considered an enemy alien, despite having been born in Canada. So he ended up in Ontario. He worked in a greenhouse for a while, and then he got a job as a newspaper typesetter. And as far as I know, he never fished commercially ever again. So I was also interested in this story of adaptability, and also interested in the economic effects of this, and the loss of livelihood, and the loss of generational wealth, and the loss of generational knowledge, and the loss of cultural ties and community, like all the ripple effects of the events of 1942. During my research, I came across this beautiful suitcase filled with Japanese boat building tools. This is at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center in Toronto. And by some astounding stroke of luck, amazing coincidence, I was gifted a box of 1930s era boat building tools by a family member. And a number of them ended up being used in a performance in the summer of 2019 in Richmond. This was an exhibition for the Art Gallery of Richmond. It's curated by Sean Dacey. And this is a still shot from the documentation where I'm standing in the Fraser River Delta. And the premise of the performance was that I would stand in the water equipped with rudimentary tools, basically the boat building tools that I had no familiarity with, and a couple of sheets of plywood and some nailing strips. And I attempted over the course of a few hours to build a functioning boat that would allow me to paddle to shore. This was my hope. And the conceit of the piece is that I'm sort of imagining I'm cut adrift in a really bad situation that I was hoping to extricate myself from. So to do that, I kind of had this hazy plan that I would, in the moment, I would figure out how to use these very unfamiliar tools. I would solve the problems, sort of as complications arose. And again, I was thinking about adaptability and thinking about my grandfather, who presumably knew stuff about boats and tools and tides and water temperatures and stuff. And this is all knowledge that I did not inherit because of the events of the Second World War, because of the internment of the Japanese Canadians and the families moved to Toronto. There was no sort of maritime knowledge passed down to me. Another still. This is me using a reverse tooth Japanese saw for the first time. And in this performance, I was not trying to build a traditional Japanese boat. I was just trying to build a boat, and sort of accepting that, and in fact, shining a spotlight on the fact that I don't know what a traditional Japanese boat should look like, and that's sort of part of the point of the piece is that knowledge that wasn't passed down. It's hard to do this stuff without a saw table, actually. But anyway, it sort of came together. The boat was zip tied together, which actually isn't a traditional boat building technique, but I was trying to be realistic about the time constraints and make concessions. And eventually the boat and the tools and the video documentation were displayed at the Richmond Art Gallery. I'm just going to actually kind of speed through because I'm conscientious of the time here, but working on a current project called Yume Digital Dreams, and this is another wonderful collaboration with a great artist named Bako Ohama, and together we're collaborating on a project that's actually going to be released in 2.5 weeks. Just a little plug for that before I sign off. Stop share.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jon. And oops, there we go. Love to hear all the background of the development from them. So next up is Brent Hirose. Brent.
All right, just get my notes up here. Thank you so much for having me, everyone. I'm from Vancouver, where I live on the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. But today I'm actually joining you on vacation in Montreal, which, as I was doing my research into this, I was quite surprised to learn is actually also on unceded territory of the Ganyan-Geha First Nation. So just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. So this is a little bit looser what I'm talking about. As you may have heard in my bio, I am an actor, writer, director, improviser, voiceover artist. I like to say I am a multi-purpose theater artist. I will take anyone's money. But my Japanese Canadian identity has definitely been something that has been a long part of my career and has helped shape it in ways both intentional and unintentional. So I was originally born in Edmonton, but my family moved around a lot as a kid. We lived in Calgary, Ajax, Regina, finally settling down longer term in Winnipeg, which is where my father's family is more or less been largely based. I studied at the University of Winnipeg, where I obtained my honors degree in theater and film, and from that point looked to start my career as an actor. Now, I spent some time in Winnipeg before moving over to Vancouver in 2011. And at that point, I was becoming more involved in work dealing with my cultural background, particularly there meeting other Japanese Canadian artists, particularly half Japanese Canadian artists, including Jeff Chiba Stearns, who was running the Hapapalooza Festival there, and Yoshie Bancroft. I did notice in the Q&A somebody was mentioning that all the artists here featured were all men, and I believe Yoshie was actually originally approached to do this, and she is not here because she's in Paris. So I will hope to do some justice to the work that she is doing and that she brought me in on. Now, the reason why I wanted to give this sort of brief overview of my career in particular is that I think one thing that Japanese Canadian artists, particularly in theater and even more so in film, run into is this question of where you fit with your particular cultural identity, especially being half Japanese and sort of working in this work, discovering how, Japanese Canadians have the largest diaspora and are the most intermarried cultural group out of all the cultural groups in Canada. It really sort of speaks to a lot of the sort of deliberate dilution of our culture and of our history that has happened over time. And it was a really big changing for me in Vancouver, meeting a bunch more Japanese Canadian artists and seeing how everyone shares a lot of perhaps not touchstones to Japanese history, but certainly touchstones to this emptiness, this void where that culture and that history would have been. So working on that has been something that has brought me both personal fulfillment, but also brought me closer to the lives and the history of my own family. And that comes from somebody who, up until exploring this more, has definitely been cast more as Latino than I have as half Japanese. But thankfully, through creating my own work and through working with other half Japanese Canadians and Japanese Canadians, we're creating work that is telling the story of this sort of loss of culture. So I originally had started working when I lived in Winnipeg on a play called Heads Held High. And this was my play about the internment. I think a lot of Japanese Canadian playwrights, see this almost as a rite of passage, this one thing we have in our history to draw from. And that was actually a very, very difficult project to take on, and something that I've talked to with a lot of other artists, particularly when we're dealing with this kind of history that is history that at the time my grandmother was still around, my great uncle and great aunt were still around, and so this was a history that was theirs that feels very strange as an artist to take on and try to either semi-fictionalize or try to do exactly right by, knowing that there's all these people who were there. And then in later years, working on other projects, dealing with the fact that there's a bit of a race to try to find the last remembrances of people who were involved in internment, and to try to hold on to that history, because it's something that I think that's really been impressed on me, is something that people still, even to this day, don't really know, or it doesn't actually land on them the same way. And so I've seen a large part of my role as an actor and a playwright, and as somebody animating this history, of making an accessible version of this history, but also one that hits on this personal level. And talking to people from touring with various productions around the country, it's very interesting. And I think it's most important for us to have these opportunities to do talkbacks, talking to other folks. So I mentioned Yoshie Bancroft. She and her long-term collaborator, Joanna Garfinkel, they had begun working on a project about the Japanese Canadian internment, which eventually became titled Japanese Problem. And this was a project that I was brought in during the early part of the workshopping process, and managed to work with it all the way through into its eventual productions. Ended up performing all over BC, as well as being brought to Toronto to be a part of Soul Pepper Theatre's season. So it was really successful in terms of not only a bunch of people coming to see the show, but also in terms of the feedback that we were getting. And both in the creation and in the performance aspect, one of the things that I found so useful and so important on it is that we really took a lot of space and a lot of time to acknowledge the audience. So when we first started doing this play, we were doing it inside Hastings Park. And as was mentioned earlier, this is a horse stables that still exists inside the Peony. Most people who live in Vancouver, see the Peony as some fun place that they go to enjoy the fair and see the animal shows and whatnot during the summer. And to sort of shine a light on this dark side of its history, particularly being able to show photos that we projected and lined them up almost exactly with the same angle that the photo was taken. So you can see how very little the barns have actually changed from when it was housing Japanese women and children. And so working through all of that and allowing the audience to have a way to step out of the experience if they so need to, as we were taking them through the actual environment that this would have been placed in. And then having these talkbacks after the show, where we were really taking a lot of care to make sure that people have the ability to decompress from the experience. And I think that was useful not only for the audience members, particularly audience members coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, but also for the performers as well, because this is something that I think has hit people really, really strong, to feel the very, very visceral realness of what happened, and to see, I think, not only how this is a Japanese Canadian experience, but also speaks to the experience of many other people from different cultures, from different diasporas, who have things that have parallels to them. Because ultimately, I think, the importance of centering things around the internment is not to only keep this moment in history alive, but to draw parallels to other things that we're seeing in the world and other things that we're pushing back up. Unfortunately, I don't have any slides to show on the screen for this, but if you do check out Universal Limited's website, they do have a bunch of shots that were taken from those productions. From there, I was able to work with Righting Wrongs, which was also mentioned, reading a letter that my great-grandfather wrote, who was dispossessed of his property during the internment, and ended up having a buyer, a friend of his, who wanted to buy the property from him and was not allowed to use that in his not allowed to use that buyer because the government had sold it without his consent. And being able to go there to the area inside Richmond, to the Steveston docks, where there were formerly all these Japanese fishermen, and read the letter, was very, very powerful. Japanese Problem actually did tour there as well, and we had the opportunity in our talkbacks there to speak with a woman who was able to share the memory of being a young child in a poor family around that time, whose family suddenly were gifted with a new house to live in, which was a formerly Japanese Canadian house. And starting that unpacking of how that generational shift, that possession and redistribution of wealth affected families both negatively and, in her case, positively. It was really, really interesting and a healing experience to go through. So I think that this work is so important for us as Japanese Canadians, not only to tell our own story, but again, to be able to put a face to something that otherwise has been largely erased, and again, does not have the same thing as when you're reading it through a textbook, as to see somebody living through it, as to feel the connection. And that's something that I think, as an artist, as an actor, I feel so strongly about, that we have the ability to perform, to bring to life something, and particularly when it's something that has all of this real history behind it. So I'm very excited right now to be continuing to work on new works. Carolyn Nakagawa, who has been mentioned before and was one of the contributors to Japanese Problem, is currently working on a piece called The New Canadians. It's a new musical that is based around the Japanese Canadian newspaper, the only one that was allowed to continue during World War II, and talking about that history, and also sort of the complicated legacy of something like that. And if anything that I've seen sort of develop more and more in this work is an ability to, rather than try to get the whole story right, like I was trying to do in my first play, but to include the complication, include the fact that the Japanese Canadian community are not a monolith, and that there is a lot of discussion and discomfort and healing and hurting that is continuing to go on today. So this is not dead history. This is living history that continues to feel out today. I'm working on a new piece myself, which I hope to be working on with some of the playwriting organizations in Vancouver. It is looking at some of this cultural history of the diaspora of Japanese Canadians through the lens of a murder mystery. So hopefully that will continue to develop. That's all my time. So thank you so much. And thank you again for being here.
Thanks so much, Brent. And sorry, everyone, we are running a little bit over, but you don't want to miss Kellen's presentation. He's up next. And so Kellen, over to you.
Thanks, Sherri. Yeah, so I see we're running a bit of behind here. I'll try to keep this brief, but I just wanted to start with a bit of background. Excuse me. And I apologize in advance. I'm trying to get over COVID now as well. So if I cough, I apologize. So my background is my grandmother and grandfather were both sent to New Denver, and my grandmother was living in Prince Rupert prior to that, and my grandfather was living in Vancouver. My grandfather was actually born in Canada, and my grandmother came here as a young child. And my grandmother did speak to us a little bit about internment as kids, and I don't know at what time, but I do remember that I was aware of it before we were sort of touching upon it in school, whatever little we did learn about it in history class. And one thing that she did share with us was an illustrated book, and I don't know what happened to that book, and I can't find it anymore, but it was about a family and the father leaving, and then the children and the mother eventually joining him at some point. And that was my real only connection to the story, aside from a few little bits that she would share as well. So there's always been a bit of a disconnection and a connection to the history. And I would say that's the same for, just my Japanese heritage in general, specifically because I'm also half Japanese. So this is something that I'm constantly trying to work out, and I'm doing in my work now. Through this project that is up at the Nikkei Museum now, based on the Vancouver Asahi baseball team, I've come to learn a lot more. And in particular, I was using the Landscapes of Injustice archive, which is an incredible resource that has archived tons and tons of documents from internment. So I was able to find some documents about my grandparents. And so I learned that my grandfather and great-grandfather they owned a grocery store in Vancouver that they were forced to sell. And actually, talking about Hastings Park, I found a document about my grandma's father, so my great-grandfather on that side, actually passed away while being held at Hastings Park. And I'd have to look into why he was there, but I think it was because he was a bit older and he was in bad health. So reading these two particular things, it was a visceral reaction that I hadn't had before talking about internment or learning about it, and it made a huge impact on me. As well, I also listened to a lot of oral histories and interviews from people that experienced it at the time. So all of those bits of information that I got while I was doing the research for this project really changed my understanding of what it might have been like to be there and experience it, and things that I hadn't gotten from my grandmother. So the Vancouver Asahi team I learned about as an adult, and it was before I was making art, and I was just really excited and proud to learn about this team. The fact that they even existed in a time of intense discrimination, played in a league that was aside from themselves was all Caucasian. And not only were they playing, but they were dominating in many years and won so many titles. And so originally, when I started this art project, I was just interested in sharing the story because I hadn't heard it, and we don't get stories like this in Western media and culture very often. And I think if I had known about it as a kid, it might have shaped me in a different way. And so I wanted to be able to try to share that with anybody who hadn't learned about it before. So I started writing a grant for this project. And during that writing process, I really started to make the connection between the team and internment, and how the team could be a way to discuss and explore the effects of internment on the Japanese Canadian community, both for people at the time, but also for future generations. And so once I made that connection, the project really started to unfold for me quite a bit. And I made more connections between the Asahi and baseball and internment, and how all those things can sort of play together. And it really gave me a way in to speak about this, because I hadn't really set out to make work about internment. And if I didn't have this kind of way in to discuss it, I don't know if I would have been comfortable doing so. There are so many twists of fate in this as well. And one fun story is just that I happened to come across Pat Adachi's Asahi book at Sanko, the grocery store in Toronto, and have since learned that it's a very difficult book to find. So it's been an interesting journey getting to this point. So I'd like to start to share some of the work with you now. Just gonna share my screen. Oops. You might have recognized this piece from Sherri's background. And this is a series of the first works that I created for the project. And I was really inspired actually by these vintage Japanese baseball cards that I had come across, and they're made by collaging old black and white photographs together. And so I started working with that as an aesthetic in these pieces. And what I liked about those baseball cards was that they had a sense that they felt like they were almost homemade. And I like that feeling because...
Sorry, Kellen, the
Yep.
screen share didn't work. Do you want to just
Oh.
try that one more time?
Oh, sorry. Okay, let me just... Yes. Okay, I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. Sorry about that, everyone. Yes.
That works. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'll just go back. So this was the image I was talking about first, and it's part of this series. So these are all works on paper with cutout and collage. And what I was getting to was I like to think about these kind of as in reference to the homemade signs that people bring to the stadium to cheer on the team. And in that way, I felt like I could connect the team to community. And that's one of the biggest themes throughout this work is, we understand people's relationship to a sports team and to their hometown team, but I feel like the Asahi was something different and something far more important in so many ways and to what they meant to the community. So trying to tie the two together was something I was really striving for. And through the work and thinking about internment, what sort of is the tie through everything is just the question of what might have been and trying to think about how I can approach that in a visual sense. And one way in these pieces is thinking about the players and where they might have gotten to if the team had have continued to progress. Would they have been seen like the pro athletes of today? And, what endorsements would they have, for example? And so you'll see nods to sportswear brands that you would recognize, but I also thought, the team is something that's so Japanese Canadian, and that's such a nuanced thing. And so what other kind of endorsements might these players have gotten? And so I've tried to tie in nods to Japanese brands or items or objects from the community in these pieces as well. The next piece I'd like to talk about is called Lineup. And this is a continuation of the other works. So works on paper as well. And you'll see in the previous slides and this work as well, the colors that I'm choosing are quite bright and vibrant. And this was a very conscious decision I had. I really wanted to make sure that the joy and the celebration of the team came through in this work because, in dealing with internment as a theme, it would have been very easy to go fully dark and really focus in on the trauma, which is an important aspect. But the team also, from learning and listening to people speak about the team who had a personal connection to them, you really get the sense of how much joy and celebration there was around them. And I wanted to make sure that that was honored in the work as well. And so this piece, there's a very obvious juxtaposition between the two. There's the bright figures who seem quite heroic, and then these sort of empty baseball diamonds, which represent the team just being abruptly taken from the game of baseball forever as a result of internment. You might have noticed as well that the figures are positioned in a pretty specific way. And I was trying to reference the format of mugshots because even though those pieces are done in the vibrant kind of color schemes, I wanted to talk about how the community was vilified and criminalized at the time of internment, and even players who had done so much with their play on the field were not exempt to this discrimination. So that was the reason for showing them in this way. The next thing that is really important as well throughout the work that is definitely a through line is using objects to talk about loss. And in this piece, this is a photographic process called a cyanotype. And I was really just thinking about loss and what was left, what had gotten taken away, what people lost, and what was destroyed, what was taken to other people, and where are those things now? And as well, what is the, for example, in terms of the team, what games did we miss out on? What seasons could there have been in the future? And so I was playing with this idea of an imagined future and memory as well. And so the reason I wanted to use a cyanotype to do that is I was actually drawing on top of an acetate while this paper was exposing. And at the end of the piece, I wiped the ink away to reuse the acetate. So at the end, this piece is actually sort of a memory of the drawing rather than the actual drawing itself. And so it was a way for me to try to understand, the process of memory and how memories are not perfect and exact. They're sort of part of, they're a remnant of the actual event or thing. The other way that I was thinking about objects in terms of baseball was memorabilia. And again, because the team was Japanese Canadian, I kind of wondered and imagined what the memorabilia could look like from a Japanese Canadian team. So I used a traditional Daruma doll as one item. And the tradition with these dolls, when you get them, is to color in one eye and set an intention or a goal, and then fill in the other once you've achieved it. And so for this piece on the left, the one that I've made, the eye never gets filled in. And so that's a way that I tried to think about, the loss of legacy and the loss of what could have been for the team and what they weren't able to accomplish. And the piece to the right of that is a paper. So these are both made out of paper mache. This figure, I was thinking about, action figures and the way that people, immortalize heroic figures in that way. And, I thought it could be, considered like a literal action figure, or perhaps, like a homemade version that someone might have made for their kid. And, just thinking about that as a way to think about the importance of the team to the community and community members. And in using paper, I was also thinking about, making do with what you have available. And, even if resources are scarce, both for people who are immigrants, but also life in the camps, being able to have the resilience to make do with what you have, I think is a very important and powerful message. And so that was another reason why I was working with paper quite a bit throughout this exhibition. This is a piece that I think Sherri introduced as well. It's the centerpiece to the work at the exhibition that's currently up now. And it's called The Pride of Powell Street. And so these are larger than life kind of figures. They're about 9 to 10 feet tall. And the physical size of them is meant to evoke the feeling and the stature that the team had within the community and what they meant. And then on the back side, these sort of patchwork pieces are meant to represent the community in 3 separate categories. And so in a way, they're sort of backing the team. And then so from left to right, the blue one represents the fishing community. The middle one is sort of urban and Vancouver. And then the red piece has a few different elements. So it discusses, the residential home, but also the connection to the lumber industry and also boat building. You can see, the Japanese pole saw, for example, is in there. All of these have some personal meaning, but the one in the middle is probably the most personal. Right down the center in the blue box is my grandmother's maiden name, Nonoyama. And then the address there, 43 East 5th, is the address I got for where my grandfather's grocery store used to be. And then the last piece there, the instrument in the orange box, the shamisen, has great personal meaning. I was talking briefly about objects and how that can be used to talk about loss. And my great grandmother on my grandma's side had one of these instruments before internment, and it was something that she lost when she was forced to leave. It was too large to bring. So thinking about heirlooms and what they mean to families and communities and culture, I was thinking like, I wonder if this item got destroyed, or if it's still out there and it exists in someone else's life and it's going through a different family now, because if internment hadn't happened, I'm sure that this would still be in our family today. So that is a pretty powerful and personal object in that piece. Another really important object that I have throughout the work is the teapot. So the piece on the left is an imagined Asahi memorabilia piece again, and it's in the form of a teapot. There's also a teapot in the red banner of the Pride of Palestry. There's a teapot in the collage works as well. And I made also a really large scale paper teapot, which is made of paper pulp and enamel paint. So it looks and feels quite a bit like ceramic. And the meaning behind this kind of came to me over time. At first, I was just using it because it's a very obvious and obviously important cultural object, but it became the symbol of the way that my grandmother kind of dealt with her experience, and that, the hard, strong ceramic exterior of the teapot was representing the stoic, calm way in which that she talked about internment to us, and it was a bit guarded as well. And then if you can, I'll just go back here, the little bit of steam coming out of the top represents, just the little bit that she was letting us in to see, and just the hint that there's more going on beneath the surface, or in the case of the teapot, the boiling water or tea that's inside of it. And so I used to feel like I had to be angry for her in a way, and she would always approach it with the saying "shigata ganai," which I think a lot of people of Japanese Canadian history or of descent get from their elders and their grandparents. And yeah, I felt like I maybe needed to be angry for her when she took that kind of stance, but I've come to see that resilience and way of being able to move forward and still have this beautiful life as being just so resilient and strong. And I think now that instead of just being sort of upset or angry, I can, continue to do this work and keep her memory and her legacy alive in that way. So those are sort of my takeaways from doing this entire project. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kellen. I just want to say to everyone that I'm so sorry, but we've run a little bit over time and we've run out of time for Q&A, but I just want to thank all of you, and do keep in touch with the Nikkei National Museum at center.nikkeiplace.org. I want to thank Jorge and everyone at the VPL, and I'm going to sign off now, but thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Sherri, for doing this and for bringing us all together with this incredible conversation. Thank you, Jon, Kellen, Brent, for sharing your incredible work. I want to remind the audience very quickly that Kellen's work is on view at Nikkei until Saturday. So please take yourselves, take your family, take your friends, go see the show as you witness right now. It's incredible. So go see it in person on before Saturday or before Sunday. And thanks again, everyone, for joining and spending your lunchtime with us. If you want to watch this event again, or if you want to share it with your friends, the event was live streamed to the library's YouTube channel, so you can find it there. So we're going to share a link to the playlist where that's going to appear. You can also find it in the future just by typing on Google Uplift Asian VPL, and the landing page of the series will have the replay button right there. So on that note, I have a quick favor to ask you. We will love it if you gave us feedback about this event, because as you know, we're a public institution and our job is really to do programs that work for you. So your feedback is very important, so we keep getting better at this. So we're going to share a link to a form in the chat, which should take a minute to fill out. And I promise you, it doesn't go into a dark hole of the internet. We really actually listen to your feedback. We're also going to share a link to a newsletter if you want to know more about these events. But again, I will stress that the Uplift Asian landing page is the best place to find out about events on this particular series. On that note, I'm going to tell you briefly about two upcoming events on that series. On May 12th, we're hosting a film screening and a discussion with award-winning Filipinx Canadian filmmaker Joella Cavalu And she made a film called Koto, The Last Service, which is about a beloved Japanese family restaurant in Campo River and how it helped build community during the 4 years that it was open. And so Joella is going to have a conversation with the co-producer, who's Kenji Maeda, whose family owned this restaurant. So that's May 12th. And then on May 26th, we're hosting a conversation about K-pop and activism. So stay tuned for more details on that one. We haven't published it yet, but you're the first people to know about it. Anyway, so we're going to reshare the series link so you can find more information about that series. I suggest that you register for the upcoming event now, just so that you don't forget. We send you an automated reminder the day before. I don't know about you, but my brain really needs these kinds of reminders, especially during this COVID era of a lot of time spent on screens. That's it from me. That's it for today. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to keep the event open for another few minutes, just so that you can click on all the links that we just shared. But I'm leaving now. So thank you all for being here and for your lovely comments. Have a good day. Ciao.